For decades, the Assad family ruled Syria with an iron fist. Hafez al-Assad seized power in a 1970 coup. He brutally suppressed dissent. His son, Bashar, inherited this mantle in 2000. Initially, Bashar offered hope for reform. However, he proved just as ruthless. The Arab Spring uprisings of 2011 presented the Assad regime with its most significant challenge. Peaceful protests were met with brutal force. The regime's crackdown ignited a full-fledged civil war. The conflict drew in regional and global powers, transforming the country into a battleground for proxy wars. Russia's intervention in the Syrian civil war in 2015 was a strategic masterstroke. Moscow deployed its military might to support a faltering Syrian army. Russian airstrikes turned the tide of the war in Assad's favor. This intervention reasserted Russia's presence on the world stage. However, the ongoing war in Ukraine has strained its resources. The Kremlin's focus on Ukraine raises questions about its commitment to Syria. The fall of Assad's regime exposes the limits of Moscow's influence. Balancing commitments in Ukraine and Syria will be a major challenge for Russia. The United States and Turkey, despite their complex relationship, found common cause in supporting the Syrian opposition. Both countries viewed the Assad regime as a destabilizing force in the region and sought its removal. However, their approaches differed, leading to friction and a lack of coordination. The United States, initially hesitant to intervene directly, provided training and weapons to vetted rebel groups. However, this support was often limited and inconsistent, hampered by concerns about arming extremist elements within the opposition. Turkey, on the other hand, adopted a more assertive approach, providing safe havens for Syrian refugees and allowing its territory to be used as a conduit for arms and fighters flowing into Syria. This uneasy alliance played a significant role in shaping the trajectory of the Syrian conflict. While the United States and Turkey shared the goal of ousting Assad, their divergent interests and strategies often undermined their efforts. The lack of a cohesive international response to the Syrian crisis allowed the conflict to fester, creating a vacuum that was exploited by extremist groups. The fall of the Assad regime presents both opportunities and challenges for the United States and Turkey. It removes a common adversary, but also raises questions about the future of the Syrian opposition and the potential for renewed instability in the region. Washington and Ankara will need to find common ground to address the challenges of post-Assad Syria and prevent the emergence of new threats to their interests. Israel, while officially neutral in the Syrian civil war, has been a key player behind the scenes. The Jewish state views Iran's growing influence in Syria as an existential threat. Israel has launched airstrikes against Iranian-linked targets to prevent advanced weapons transfers to Hezbollah. The fall of the Assad regime presents Israel with both opportunities and risks. It removes a hostile regime but creates a power vacuum that could lead to chaos. Israel's strategic calculus in Syria is complex and multifaceted. It must balance countering Iranian influence with avoiding a wider conflict. Israel will likely continue targeted strikes against Iranian assets while engaging with regional actors. The fall of the Assad regime has unleashed a scramble for control of Syrian territory, exacerbating existing tensions and creating new ones. With the central government in disarray, various factions, each with their own agendas and allegiances, are vying for power. Kurdish groups in northeastern Syria, having carved out a degree of autonomy during the civil war, are seeking to consolidate their gains and secure their future. Turkey, fearing the establishment of an independent Kurdish entity on its border, has launched military operations against Kurdish forces, further complicating the situation. The Syrian conflict has also become a battleground for regional rivalries, with Saudi Arabia and Iran backing opposing sides. The Saudis, seeking to counter Iranian influence, have provided support to Sunni rebel groups, while Iran has backed the Assad regime and deployed its own forces, including Shia militias, to bolster its ally. This complex web of competing interests has turned Syria into a tinderbox, with the potential for even greater violence and instability. The absence of a clear victor in the Syrian civil war and the fragmentation of the country have created a dangerous power vacuum, raising the specter of a protracted conflict with regional and global implications. Section 6. The Rise of the Black Flag: Terrorism's Grip on the Syrian Maelstrom. The Syrian civil war, with its brutal violence, displacement of millions, and collapse of governance, has created a fertile breeding ground for extremist groups. Among these, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, emerged as the most potent, exploiting the chaos to seize vast swaths of territory and declare a caliphate. ISIS's reign of terror, marked by mass executions, sexual slavery, and the destruction of cultural heritage sites, shocked the world. The group's sophisticated propaganda machine attracted foreign fighters from across the globe, drawn to its apocalyptic ideology and promises of a utopian Islamic state. While ISIS has been territorially defeated in Syria, the group's ideology and the conditions that allowed it to flourish persist. The Syrian conflict has left deep scars on the social fabric of the country, creating a generation scarred by war and vulnerable to radicalization. The fall of the Assad regime, while a blow to extremist groups like ISIS, does not guarantee their demise. The underlying factors that fueled their rise, including sectarianism, poverty, and lack of opportunity, remain. Addressing these root causes is essential to preventing the resurgence of terrorism in Syria and the wider region. Section 7. A Cry in the Wilderness, the Syrian Humanitarian Crisis and Global Inaction. The Syrian civil war has produced one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern history. Millions have been displaced from their homes, seeking refuge in neighboring countries or living in squalid camps within Syria. The conflict has devastated the country's infrastructure, leaving millions without access to basic necessities like food, water, and healthcare. The international community's response to the Syrian crisis has been widely criticized as inadequate and ineffective. Efforts to broker a political solution have repeatedly failed, hampered by divisions among the major powers and the intransigence of the warring parties. Humanitarian aid, while desperately needed, has often been insufficient and slow to reach those in need. The fall of the Assad regime, while potentially opening a new chapter in the Syrian tragedy, does not erase the immense suffering endured by millions. The humanitarian crisis in Syria will require a sustained and coordinated international effort to address the immediate needs of the population and support the long and arduous process of reconstruction and reconciliation. The Syrian people deserve more than empty promises and fleeting expressions of concern. They deserve concrete action from the international community to alleviate their suffering, hold perpetrators of atrocities accountable, and create the conditions for a just and lasting peace. Section 8. The Unraveling, the Regional Implications of Assad's Fall. The collapse of the Assad regime sends shockwaves throughout the Middle East, upending the regional order and creating a cascade of uncertainties. The Syrian conflict, already a proxy war for regional powers, threatens to escalate as these actors jockey for influence in the post-Assad era. Iran, having invested heavily in propping up the Assad regime, faces a significant setback. The loss of its Syrian ally weakens Iran's regional ambitions and exposes it to potential challenges from its rivals. Israel, viewing Iran's presence in Syria as an existential threat, may be emboldened to take more aggressive action, raising the risk of a wider conflict. The Syrian refugee crisis, already straining resources and fueling social tensions in neighboring countries, is likely to worsen as people flee the violence and instability. This exodus could have destabilizing effects on countries like Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, which are already grappling with their own internal challenges. The fall of the Assad regime is a watershed moment for the Middle East, with far-reaching implications for regional security, stability, and the balance of power. The coming years will be critical in determining the course of events in Syria and the wider region. Section 9. The Future of Ashes, Syria at a Crossroads. The road ahead for Syria is fraught with challenges. The country lies in ruins, its economy shattered, its social fabric torn apart. The legacy of the Assad regime, with its brutal repression and systematic human rights abuses, will cast a long shadow. The task of rebuilding Syria and forging a new political order will be monumental. It will require a genuine commitment to reconciliation and accountability, as well as substantial international support. The Syrian people, having endured so much, deserve a future free from violence, oppression, and fear. The fall of the Assad regime, while a necessary step towards ending the Syrian tragedy, is only the beginning of a long and arduous journey. The international community must not abandon Syria in its hour of need. It must stand with the Syrian people as they strive to rebuild their lives and their country from the ashes of war.